嚟敬拜我哋大能嘅神。而家崇拜開始，希望大家用一個安靜謙虛嘅態度嚟聆聽神嘅話語。如果方便，請大家起立。願頌讚歸於我們主耶穌基督的父神，他在基督裏曾賜給我們天上各樣屬靈的福氣，就如神從創立世界以前，在基督裏揀選了我們，使我們在他面前成為聖潔，無有瑕疵。又因愛我們，就按着自己意旨所喜悅的，預定我們藉着耶穌基督得兒子的名分，使他榮耀的恩典得着稱讚。這恩典是他在愛子裏所賜給我們的。我們藉這愛子的血得蒙救贖，過犯得以赦免，乃是照他豐富的恩典。這恩典是神用諸般智慧聰明，充充足足賜給我們的，都是照他自己所預定的美意，叫我們知道他旨意的奧秘，要照他安排的作日期滿足的時候，使天上地上一切所有的都在基督裡面同歸於一。以弗所書1章3至10節，請坐。而家為崇拜禱告。神啊，我哋萬軍嘅耶和華，尊大能力榮耀強盛威嚴都係你嘅，並且你係至高為萬有之首。你為着擔當我哋每一個人嘅罪，耶穌基督反倒虛己，取咗奴僕嘅形象，甚至死在十字架上，一個都唔放棄我哋。而家有機會崇拜你係無比嘅福氣，求你幫助我哋專心聆聽你嘅話語，使我哋每天都有屬靈嘅福氣，能夠得到你智慧嘅帶領，因為在你裡面每一刻都係好嘅。又求你保守今天崇拜嘅每一個環節，我哋祈禱係奉主耶穌基督得勝嘅名字而求，阿門。
兄姊妹平安，早晨。如果可以嘅話，請大家起立，我哋用詩歌讚美神。主啊，你嘅恩典實在係奇異，你 喺我哋仲係罪人嘅時候，釘喺十字架上面，為我哋嘅罪而死。而我哋嘅罪靠住主耶穌你嘅寶血能夠洗淨，我哋能夠翻去父神，翻去你嗰度，同你有一個和好嘅關係。主啊，就係求你喺今天呢一個嘅早上，俾我哋懷住感恩嘅心去回應你俾我哋嘅恩典。主啊，就讓我哋用一個禱告嘅心、讚美嘅心去唱以下呢一首嘅詩歌《奇異恩典》。當我哋感受到神奇異嘅恩典對我哋嘅愛同寬恕嘅時候，我哋用行動去回應。喺羅馬書12章，保羅咁樣講： 所以弟兄們，我以神的慈悲勸你們，將身體獻上，當作活祭，是聖潔的，是神所喜悅的。你們如此侍奉，乃是理所當然的。讓我哋謙卑倒空我哋自己，做神一個流通嘅管子，去傳揚神嘅愛。踏上基督的足印，現身主愛進入人海，立志今擺上，傳揚耶穌，用我的恩賜獻上最好，讓我謙卑作你僕人，存着敬畏去侍奉神，全是你恩典覆蓋每步亮明燈，在你恩手裏滿布雲彩，效法基督愛，眼界變改，願鴿子天際降下來，陶造我裏面能承載神豐足的厚愛。醒覺要被擦乾，能穿起舊印，踏上基督的足印，現身主愛進入人海，立志今擺上，傳揚耶穌，用我的恩賜獻上最好，讓我謙卑作你僕人，存着敬畏去侍奉神，全是你恩典覆蓋每步亮明燈，在你恩手裏滿布雲彩，效法基督愛，眼界變改，讓鴿子天際降下來，陶造我裏面能承載神豐足的厚愛，立志今擺上，傳揚耶穌，用我的恩賜獻上最好，讓我謙卑作你僕人，存着敬畏去侍奉神，全是你恩典覆蓋每步亮明燈，在你恩手裏滿布
雲中，效法基督愛，眼界變改。願鴿子天際降下來，陶造我裏面能承載神豐足的厚愛。
願鴿子天際降下來，
陶造我裏面能承載
神豐足的厚愛。
而家係奉獻嘅時間，奉獻係基督徒嘅責任同埋恩典，對神嘅感恩與愛嘅回應，包括全人、全心同埋金錢嘅奉獻。如果你仲唔係基督徒，或者對奉獻唔明白嘅，你係唔需要勉強奉獻。我哋而家奉獻有幾個方法，俾現場嘅弟兄姊妹，我哋可以將金錢或者支票放喺後邊嘅奉獻箱裏邊。另外一個方法呢，就係寄支票直接寄去教會。第三個方法就係透過網站奉獻。網站同埋教會嘅地址都喺熒光幕上。而家我哋為奉獻祈禱。神啊，你治理萬物，豐富尊榮都係你嚟嘅，使人尊大強盛都係出於你。我哋算乜嘢嘢？而家又俾機會我哋喺金錢上奉獻，可以喺你事工上邊有份。我哋知道樂意奉獻係你所喜悅的，就求你俾我哋有一個樂意奉獻嘅心，把我哋從你而嚟嘅獻給你。求你悅納呢一個奉獻，俾教會領袖有聰明智慧，知道點樣運用呢啲資源嚟擴展你嘅事工。我哋祈禱係奉主耶穌基督得勝嘅名字而求，阿門。
弟兄姊妹早晨，感謝神，今日我哋能夠見到一啲好耐冇見嘅弟兄姊妹朋友翻嚟同我哋一齊崇拜、一齊敬拜我哋嘅主，我哋都好感恩能夠再一次實體嘅見面，讓我哋一齊低頭為今日嘅崇拜同埋一啲嘅事項禱告。天父上帝，我哋多謝你眷顧我哋，眷顧我哋一班嘅弟兄姊妹都可以帶領佢哋翻到嚟同我哋一齊實體嘅去敬拜神你。求主你都繼續去保守我哋嘅安全。當我哋去敬拜你嘅時候，求主你亦都俾我哋一個專注仰望你嘅心，我哋去敬拜神你。幫我哋亦都係顧念到我哋教會肢體裏邊一啲軟弱嘅弟兄姊妹。我哋為着許太都去祈禱，知道佢隻腳做完膝頭哥手術，但係呢排又好似話又痛翻咁。求主你都幫助佢可以能夠減輕呢一個痛楚，快能夠復原，可以能夠實體翻到嚟我哋當中去敬拜神你。亦都求主你幫助Grace Low，知道佢嗰個坐骨神經痛都係纏繞咗佢都兩年幾。求主你都係施恩憐憫醫治佢，亦都俾佢能夠同醫生同家人繼續去商量，有辦法咁樣呢係去搞得好呢一個嘅神經痛，使到佢唔需要每一日都要咁痛苦咁樣捱落去。響佢呢一個痛苦階段，喺呢個試煉當中，求主你都賜予佢特別多嘅信心，讓佢都能夠有盼望、有平安、有喜樂咁樣倚靠你 繼續嘅活着。我哋亦都為 Esther 去祈禱，多謝你讓佢嗰個嘅頸嗰個嘅骨嗰個嘅裂咗少少，可以慢慢能夠係復合翻。而家都係繼續戴頸箍都唔方便嘅時候，求主你都俾佢有一個忍耐嘅心，亦都求神你繼續醫治佢嗰個頸，讓佢能夠得到完全嘅康復。主啊，我哋感謝你，今日都係我哋嘅宣教主日，我哋能夠係特別去聽宣教嘅信息。我哋亦都特別為着我哋響台灣嘅宣教士清平夫婦去祈禱，但願主你繼續顧念。尤其是佢哋近排都係康復當中，佢哋都係染上呢一個嘅病毒。求主你都係讓佢哋能夠得到完全嘅醫治，亦都求你憐憫台灣。都知道有好多嘅病例嘅個案，每一天都有好多人係染病。求主你都係讓呢一個嘅疫情可以能夠響呢個地方緩慢落嚟，亦都求你幫助人民去能夠尋找人生嘅意義，讓佢哋都能夠多機會聽到你嘅福音，去歸順於神你。亦都求主你祝福清平夫婦，佢哋用運動去傳福音呢一個嘅事工。都知道佢近排開咗一啲嘅培訓班，去培訓呢一啲嘅領袖。求主你都幫助佢哋將呢一個嘅傳福音嘅項目帶到佢哋響佢哋嘅教會當中，透過呢一個嘅體育都可以能夠有機會去認識未認識你嘅人，讓佢哋都可以能夠有機會聽到福音。願主你都係繼續眷顧佢哋一切響台灣為你所做嘅。多謝你讓我哋仲有生命氣息，可以嚟到你嘅面前去敬拜神你。但願你賜福俾我哋今日能夠聽到Richard Cook 博士同我哋嘅證道。我哋知道我哋都係失喪嘅，但係你願意差派你嘅愛子耶穌嚟到我哋生命當中去拯救我哋，讓我哋得到美麗嘅生命同埋盼望。求主你都推動我哋，讓我哋將呢一個美麗嘅福音繼續傳揚開去。我哋咁嘅祈求，奉耶穌基督嘅名，阿門。
而家係讀經嘅時間，請大家起立，如果方便嘅話。今日讀嘅聖經係路加福音15章1至10節。眾稅吏和罪人都挨近耶穌，要聽他講道。法利賽人和文士私下議論說：這個人接待罪人，又同他們吃飯。耶穌就用比喻說：你們中間誰有100隻羊，失去一隻，不把這99隻撇在曠野去找那失去的羊，直到找着呢？找着了就歡歡喜喜地扛在肩上，回到家裏，請朋友鄰舍來，對他們說：我失去的羊已經找着了，你們和我一同歡喜吧。我告訴你們，一個罪人悔改，在天上也要這樣為他歡喜，較比為99個不用悔改的義人歡喜更大。或是一個婦人有10塊錢，若失落一塊，豈不點上燈，打掃屋子，細細地找，直到找着嗎？找着了，就請朋友鄰舍來，對他們說：我失落的那塊錢已經找着了，你們和我一同歡喜吧。我告訴你們，一個罪人悔改，在神的使者面前，也是這樣為他歡喜。願神祝福他自己嘅話語。請坐。今日咧好高興請到柯立天牧師為我哋證道。柯立天在信主之後咧，已經覺得係神呼召佢向中國人傳福音。咁佢就喺愛荷華大學中國現代史喺嗰度讀，咁然後成為博士。現任喺正道神學院嘅教會歷史與宣教學教授、跨文化研究碩士科主任。 佢嘅主要研究嘅範圍咧係中國教會歷史同埋普世教會歷史。佢主要教嘅科目咧就係中國教會歷史、宣教歷史、普世教會、教會史同埋宣教概論。所以我哋今日真係好高興請到柯立天牧師為我哋證道。
各位弟兄姐妹 ，Good morning.
Good morning, brothers and sisters.
I've been sitting over here having a delightful time worshiping in Cantonese.
I'm having a wonderful time.
How are we doing this?
Well,
Does he know Cantonese or not?
double translation.
Yeah, so I was looking out at the audience thinking about who it is that I'm speaking to this morning.
我頭先就係咁樣睇下個大家在座嘅人，睇下我究竟準備同邊個人講説話呢？
And I couldn't help but think of the first time I went to Hong Kong.
我真係諗起我第一次去香港，
I actually went to Hong Kong first time in 1982.
我第一次係1982年去到香港，
Took me a little while, but I figured out that was 40 years ago.
都要慢慢數算先數到呢個40年前啦。
I was a college student. We were on a short-term mission.
我當時係一個學生，一個大學學生，就係去呢個咁樣嘅短宣。
We took the train from Hong Kong and took it into Guangzhou.
我就係由香港坐火車去到廣州。
It was called a vision trip. We couldn't go to do missions, obviously, in 1982, but they hoped we would get a vision for missions.
當時係唔能夠做全福音嘅工作，所以我哋就係一個尋訪，要準備我哋應該點樣做。
So it was in 1982 August, while I was in Guangzhou, that I was called to missions and to missions in China.
就係當年8月，我喺廣州就聽到神呢個呼召，我要向中國人傳福音。
When I came to Christ, or when I came to that calling in 1982, we believed in the U.S., we believed the church in China was dead.
當時1982年，我就係接受到神呢個嘅特別嘅呼召，喺嗰時間好似覺得基督教直情係完全死亡啦喺中國裏邊。
And in 1982, I dedicated myself to the task of reintroducing the gospel of Jesus Christ into China.
就係嗰年，我特別就係要再一次喺神面前講話，我要將呢個福音再一次嘅傳入去中國。
While I finished college, when I went into seminary,
當我讀完呢個大學入去神
I
學院，
read everything I could find on the Chinese churches.
我就係每一樣我能夠揾到嘅資料，我都睇晒關於中國嘅教會。
And of course, I began to learn that maybe the church was not dead. Maybe the church was in revival.
我就係發現到，可能教會仲唔係話死咗咁沉寂，而係已經開始嘅復甦。
I remember at one point I thought, wouldn't I love to live through a revival of the church?
我有一次我就係特別諗到，我可唔可以真係再一次睇到呢個我哋嘅復甦？
Actually, I read that one of the great periods of revival in China was in 1982.
因為我再睇下1982年就係中國再一次嘅復甦。
And I thought, where was I in 1982?
我當時諗下1982年我喺邊度啊？
And I realized I was in China being revived by the revival in China. I did live through that. It was an amazing moment of realization.
我突然間我發現到就係原來當年我就係喺中國裏邊，就係可以真係我自己因為咁而可以再一次嘅復甦。
I went back to Guangzhou, to Hong Kong, then to Guangzhou in 1992 after I finished seminary.
我讀完神學院，我1992年再一次嘅經過香港翻去廣州。
10 years later, we already knew the churches in China were in revival. It was a miracle of God.
就係咁10年裏邊，我就睇到真係中國嘅再一次嘅基督教嘅復甦。
We had some, my wife and I, we had some friends take us to one of the famous churches that was meeting at the time in Guangzhou.
我哋當時就係我太太帶咗我同去見到一啲朋友喺廣州嗰度，可以大家一齊嘅工作。
The pastor of the church, many of you probably know, Reverend Samuel Lam or Lin Xiangao.
就係當時佢哋嘅喺個廣州呢個嘅牧師林憲高牧師。
And I remember I was so delighted to have an opportunity to go to a house church, me, this American from Chicago, go to a house church meeting in China, in Guangzhou.
我當時就係一個咁樣嘅傳道人，係由芝加哥去到，真係去到呢個嘅家庭教會裏邊，可以見到喺廣州裏邊嘅工作。
We went into a church and there were just small wood benches. It was probably the size of this center aisle here.
當時嘅聚會嘅地方就係好似我哋中間呢個嘅座位，淨係中間咁多嘅座位。
And we were packed in. I was sitting on these little seats. I was too big, too tall for the seat, but we were packed in, 200 or 300 people packed into this tiny space.
當時就係咁樣200-300個華人。就係逼喺一個我哋中間咁多嘅地方，我係身為一個有高大嘅人，所以當時係特別辛苦逼入去。
We worshipped God together.
但係我哋就係咁去真係能夠崇拜我哋嘅主。
And the time came for the well-known Lin Xiangao for him to come out and to preach to us.
但係當時間到，呢個林牧師佢就係出嚟向我哋傳福音。
I had been learning Mandarin for 10 years. I was so excited that here was my first house church meeting, this well-known pastor, and I was going to get to sit and enjoy the preaching of the Word of God.
當時我自己嘅感受就係話，我已經讀咗10年嘅中文，我而家可以真係坐喺度聽下呢個咁有聲望嘅林牧師，佢能夠同我哋做正道。
He went up to the front of the church and he began to preach in perfect 廣東話。
所以佢就係一號開始，佢就係咁樣同我開始嚟同我哋講，用純粹純正嘅廣東話同我哋講。
For 2.5 hours, I didn't understand a single word that he said.
2個半鐘頭嘅時間，我完全唔知佢講乜嘢嘢。
So you would think I would learn Cantonese, don't you?
所以你諗下，可能我應該去學廣東話。
God has been doing amazing things in Hong Kong, in Guangzhou, and obviously all throughout China.
神就係咁樣喺香港、廣州一路整個喺中國裏邊就係咁樣喺度工作。
The world that existed in 1982, where I thought that we would have to reintroduce the gospel to China, is completely different than what I imagined.
就係呢個世界裏邊，我1982年以為我要再一次嘅將基督教傳入去中國，原來發覺完全唔
Chinese churches are
同。
in revival, and Chinese churches now are speaking about missions.
因為中國嘅教會已經係復興，已經喺度係繼續嘅。就講緊要派人出去傳福音。
40 years ago, I would never imagine I'd be speaking at a Cantonese congregation where the church is already doing missions, and I'm here to encourage again for us to continue to do mission.
40年前，我根本就冇辦法會想像到，我可以喺個廣東話嘅教會裏邊，就係要提醒大家要做一個差傳嘅工作。
As we turn to our message, I want us to think about a question.
當我哋講今日嘅呢個主題嘅時候，我希望大家諗一個問題：
Who is the gospel for?
究竟呢個福音係俾邊個人睇嘅呢？
It's for people who are lost.
就係俾呢啲遺失嘅人去學習。
It's for people who are weak.
係俾嗰啲軟弱嘅人去需要明白。
It's for the outcast.
係俾嗰啲真係人哋睇低嘅。
It's for people who are despised.
係俾人哋真係厭惡嘅，
It's for people who are not popular.
係嗰啲真係唔係咁出名，唔係咁大家咁覺得咁好嘅人。
Have you ever felt weak or inadequate?
你有冇曾經覺得自己真係好似好軟弱，或者真係唔足夠呢？
The gospel is for you.
呢個福音就係俾我哋。
People who may worry that they're too tall or too short,
人哋可能覺得我太高或者太矮，
or they think they're too thin or they're too fat,
或者我太瘦或者我太肥，
or they think they speak too quickly, or they think they're too shy to speak at all,
或者覺得我哋真係講得太快，或者覺得真係講得太慢，好
or
似
people
好
who
怕
have
醜。
been diagnosed with a deadly disease recently.
或者真係最近就發現到原來有一個好致命嘅病痛。
The gospel is for the weak. The gospel is for the lost.
我哋呢個福音就係俾呢啲軟弱，係俾遺失呢啲嘅人。
We look this morning at these verses,
我哋睇今日嘅經文，
Luke chapter 15, 1 through 10.
就係路加福音第15章1至10節。
And what I want us to think about is what is going on in Luke chapter 15 as we turn to these parables.
我就係想大家諗下，當我哋睇個第15章嘅時間，
So
係
if we
講緊咩
think
人？
quickly of the structure, what's the structure of the Gospel of Luke?
我哋睇下呢個路加福音寫成嘅方法係點咧？
So the first 9, 10 chapters of the Gospel of Luke are focused on telling us who is Jesus.
開頭嘅第9章或者第10章裏邊就係講耶穌基督係邊個。
Luke chapters 1 through 10 tell us that Jesus is the miracle worker, and Jesus, he teaches with authority. Jesus, he is the Messiah.
因為佢開頭10章就係喺度講緊佢係有呢個權柄，佢可以做呢個各樣嘅神蹟，佢就係呢個彌賽
Then at
亞。
about chapter 10, we see the key transition in the gospel.
當佢去到第10章嘅時間，就開始嘅轉類啦。
Jesus asks Peter, "Who do you say I am?"
跟住耶穌基督就係問彼得話：你究竟你覺得我係邊個？
Remember, Peter says, "You are the Christ."
因為記得彼得就係話你就係基督。
And the climax is that moment where the disciples recognize that Jesus is the Christ.
就係喺嗰個時間，嗰啲嘅門徒就係明白到耶穌基督就係基督。
And at that moment, Jesus then turns his head and walks toward Jerusalem.
就係由嗰個日開始，耶穌基督就係轉向面對耶路撒冷。
Now, if I was writing the Gospel of Luke, the next thing I would tell is the story of Jesus arriving in Jerusalem, being hung on a cross to die for our sins.
如果我就寫嘅路加福音，我就會寫跟住就話耶穌基督入到耶路撒冷被釘喺十字架上邊。
But Luke, the author, he actually inserts about 8 chapters of Jesus' teaching right at that moment. So you come to this climax, he turns, he goes toward Jerusalem, and then we read about 8 chapters of teaching.
所以就係喺呢段時間裏邊，耶穌基督轉向耶路撒冷，就有喺8章裏邊，耶穌基督就係教導嗰啲門徒。
And let me suggest everything he teaches is valuable.
我可以提醒大家，佢每講嘅一樣嘅提議都係一個好有價值嘅。
And here in chapter 15, Jesus is teaching who is the gospel for. It is for the lost.
呢度就係講到究竟福音係嘅俾邊個？福音就係俾呢啲失喪嘅人。
And so we see as we begin Luke chapter 15, verses 1 and 2.
所以我哋一開始睇第15章第1、第2兩節，
We see that Jesus has gathered around him tax collectors and sinners.
我哋睇到嘅耶穌基督就喺呢啲嘅稅吏同埋罪人嗰度一齊。
And that's who Jesus wants to speak to.
呢個就係耶穌基督想同嗰啲人講嘅對象。
The Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they muttered, "Who are these people?" But Jesus said, "No, the lost, those are the ones I speak to."
呢啲法利賽人同埋文士，佢就喺度咁講，究竟你點解你要同佢哋一齊？耶穌
So
基督話
Jesus
我
wants
就係
to-
需要同呢啲罪人一齊。
Jesus wants to emphasize that the gospel is for them, so he then provides 3 linked parables.
耶穌就係講話，佢呢個嘅福音就係要俾呢啲失喪嘅罪人，
And all 3 parables follow the same pattern.
而且佢就係用3個比喻，3個比喻都係用同一個方法嚟講嘅。
So the first parable is a parable of the sheep.
第一個嘅比喻就係講呢個迷失嘅羊，
The second parable is the parable of the coin.
第二個就係失咗嘅錢。
Those are the 2 we looked at today.
今日我哋就係睇呢兩個嘅比喻。
Then the third parable, starting in verse 11, will be the parable of the prodigal son.
從11節開始就係講呢個浪子回頭呢個。
But they all follow this pattern: lost, look, locate.
但係佢都係用同一個方法講，先就係講迷失，就係揾到同埋即係點樣都好。
So let's look at what is lost.
我哋睇下乜嘢叫做失喪。
And then we're going to see God the Father seeking and searching for the lost.
跟住就睇下神係點樣去尋找呢啲失喪嘅人。
And when it's located, when it's found, we're going to see there is much rejoicing and celebration.
當真係揾到嘅時間，就係講下點樣歡喜，點樣快樂。
So Jesus then told them in verse 3, told them these 3 parables. We go to verse 4, and we see the first parable is a parable of the sheep.
我哋就開始睇第4節裏邊就係講呢個失咗嘅羊嘅比喻。
Let's pause and talk about sheep.
我哋停一停，諗下乜嘢係羊呢？
What do you know about sheep?
我哋所認識嘅羊係乜嘢嘢呢？
I was never a shepherd or a farmer, so maybe you know far more than me.
我從來冇做過農夫，或者係真係牧羊人。
So here are some things that I think we generally understand about sheep.
但係就係普遍嚟講，我哋可以知道我哋所認識嘅羊係乜嘢。
They're pretty dumb.
幾愚蠢下嘅，
They often get lost.
好容易就係迷失。
Why do they get lost?
點解佢會迷失呢？
The grass is always greener over there.
就係喺嗰邊嗰啲草幾時都好啲嘅。
They are easy prey.
佢係好容易就俾其他嘢食㗎啦。
And we know the lion is never far away.
我哋知道呢啲獅子就係喺嗰度附近啦。
And they seldom find their way home.
佢哋好少話真係自己識翻屋企，
So they need a shepherd.
所以佢就需要一個牧羊人。
What kind of shepherd do they need?
究竟邊種牧羊人佢需要呢？
They need a shepherd that is willing to leave the warmth and safety of the campfire.
佢就係需要一種嘅牧羊人，
He
願意
needs-
離開呢啲嘅火，可以有温暖嘅火而去揾佢。
He needs to be willing to take the risk and the danger of leaving the 99 and going out to find the one.
就係呢位牧羊人願意真係放低呢99隻，而去親身去揾嗰一隻失咗喪嘅羊。
Why does the shepherd do that?
嗰個牧羊人點解要咁樣做呢？
Because he knows each and every sheep.
因為佢認識每一隻羊，
He knows the need of that lost sheep.
佢知道嗰個迷失嗰隻羊佢嘅需要係乜。
And he goes because he cares and loves.
佢去係因為佢想照顧，亦都佢愛呢隻羊。
The shepherd goes to the ends of the world.
呢個牧羊人真係願意去到地極嚟去揾呢個失喪嘅人嘅羊。
The second parable is about a coin.
第二個比喻就係關於一個錢。
Have you ever lost something important to you?
你有冇試過失咗一啲你自己覺得好重要嘅嘢咧？
Probably almost all of us travel often.
我哋大家都時時都有去旅
And
遊。
when you travel, you probably hold on to your passport as tightly as possible.
你去旅行嘅時間，你就最緊要揸住你嘅護照，你真係揸緊，冇咗失咗。
I would say I'm particularly paranoid. I have a special pouch that I keep my passport in. I keep it around my neck. I keep it inside my shirt. And I want to make sure I know where it is all the time.
我可能係特別嘅緊張嘅人，我係整一個袋，將呢個護照擠喺裏邊，再擠喺我袋裏邊，係真係非常非常緊張，要小心。
As I was walking toward an airplane in an airport one time,
有一次我就係咁行去機場，喺機場裏邊行去飛機嗰度。
as usual, I rubbed my tummy just to make sure that I had that comfortable feeling. Yeah, there it is.
我就係咁樣摸下我自己，知道啊，我真係有呢個護照喺我身上邊嘅。
And it was gone.
但係點知就係唔見咗。
I hear a sound like you can relate to that sinking, sick feeling.
大家可能真係可以感受到我當時嗰種嘅沉重咁嘅痛苦。
Very quickly, no, nowhere.
我全身到處揾，但係都揾唔到。
Then I remembered when I was filling out a form, I had put it on the counter, and it was just there with hundreds and hundreds of people around.
跟住我諗到嘅就係當時我要填表嘅時間，我就將我嘅護照擺咗喺台上邊，附近周圍幾百嘅人來往往。
When a number of years ago, when our daughter was still young, about 8 or 10 years old, we got a dog at our house.
當我嘅女仲係8歲10歲嘅時
We got
間，
a-
我哋有一隻狗，
We got a puppy. He's so cute.
因為呢個係細狗仔，係好。
We told our daughter, we have to be very careful because the dog doesn't know, and the dog will run out. It'll run out in the street. It might run away and not come back. Be careful.
我就係咁同個女話：你要小心，因為呢隻狗可能會就係喺街上邊就行咗去會唔見咗。
For some reason, she just had this sense she wanted to see the dog run kind of wild out in the yard on his own.
但係佢就係真係想話睇下呢隻狗，如果喺花園嗰度咁樣跑嚟跑去嘅話，睇下佢點樣樣。
So she let him out the door,
所以佢就係咁打開道門俾隻狗出嚟。
and he disappeared into the neighbors' yards.
所以嗰隻狗就係咁樣走咗去鄰居府嗰邊，唔知走咗去邊。
You can imagine the sense of sadness and of panic.
你可以想像到嗰種嘅即係緊張同埋痛苦嘅感覺。
My poor daughter was just crying and crying because it's my fault. I let him out. It's my fault. It's my fault.
我個女子係猛咁喊，因為呢個係我嘅錯，我放咗隻狗出去。
Something that is lost.
呢個就係有一種嘢遺失咗。
And the point of the parable is Jesus wants the listener to hear the heart and the passion of the shepherd, of God the Father.
呢個就係耶穌基督想講俾我哋聽嘅。我哋要聽下我哋嘅父神所嘅緊張。
If there's one person far from God, the shepherd, God cares.
就係一個人遺失，神就係嘅咁緊張。
And I think he has that sick feeling in his stomach.
我相信佢就係有呢種咁嘅覺得直情病痛咁樣嘅感覺。
When people are far from God, that is the heart of God. Is that our heart? Do we share the heart of God?
神對我哋就係咁樣，我哋自己有冇好似神咁樣 真係咁緊張呢啲失喪嘅人呢？
I would add, probably here this morning, there are some of us who are far from God.
我相信在座裏邊可能有啲都仲係同神遠離。
And I believe that is right now breaking the heart of God that we have wandered away.
我相信就係我哋呢啲人，當我哋咁樣離開神嘅時間，神嘅心係幾沉痛。
So what does God do?
咁神就點做呢？
There was teaching in the Jewish temple, among the Jewish people at the time, there was a teaching that God would accept a repentant sinner to come back.
就係當時係嘅猶太人裏邊嘅，佢哋都係咁樣講，就話神係希望能夠接受呢啲回轉翻嚟嘅羊。
But Jesus changes that, doesn't he?
但係神係咪耶穌基督係咪就咁喺度改咗呢？
Because God doesn't just accept the repentant sinner, but God goes out and searches and looks for this person.
因為神唔單單就係話接受呢個失喪嘅人，而係佢真係出去尋找呢啲失喪嘅人。
He leaves the 99 and he goes out to find you.
佢就係咁樣你放低呢99嘅就係出去揾你，揾呢個第100隻。
In the second parable, the woman, she lights a lamp and sweeps the house and searches carefully. That's what God is doing.
但係講呢個失咗錢呢個嘅婦人，佢係真係點上燈打掃屋子，細細的找，就係要揾到。
I wonder if any of you have been to, don't know if you'll be able to translate this. If any of you have been to Chuck E. Cheese.
我哋大家有冇入過去呢個 Chuck E. Cheese 間鋪頭？
If you've never gone, I'm not recommending it.
如果你未入過去嘅話，我唔主張你哋入去。
It is a place for kids to have the time of their life.
嗰個地方就係俾啲細路仔可以真係一生裏邊最開心嘅，走嚟走去。
So they eat pizza and they drink soda and they just become so hyper and they run and they yell and they climb and they fall and it's chaos.
可以講話嗰啲細路仔就喺嗰度，又要食pizza， 又要飲汽水，又可以走嚟走去，又去爬高爬低，到處走嚟走去都得。
I can't imagine a worse headache than the headache I get at Chuck E. Cheese. Anyway.
我真係唔知點樣，我就頭痛啦，見到個情況。
We had a pastor a number of years ago tell us he took his 3 children to Chuck E. Cheese.
我就有一個牧師就係咁同我講，佢曾經帶
He
咗
said he
佢
was
3個
going
細路仔
crazy.
去。
One is up climbing, the other one's down in the balls, and they're all over the place.
當時一個就係向上爬，一個就向地下走，到處走嚟走去。
And then he realized
然後佢突然間就發覺
one was missing.
有一個唔見咗。
He grabbed one,
佢一手有個揾
Grab the other one.
另外一塊找埋另外嗰個。
and with panic and terror, he searched and looked everywhere.
佢當時就係簡直係又緊張又即係完全唔知點做，到處就係想揾第3個仔嘅細路。
Not able to find the 3rd child, he found an attendant.
佢冇辦法揾得到第3個仔，結果
And
佢
he
就係
said,
揾個侍應。
I'm desperate. I've lost my child.
佢就話：我真係好緊張，我揾唔到我嘅第3個仔。
And the attendant looked at him and said, well, look, you got a beautiful child on the right of you, got a cute child on the left of you. Isn't that enough?
你想下，如果呢個咁樣嘅侍應同佢講話，你嘅左手捉住一個咁美麗嘅細路，右手又咁趣致嘅細路，仲唔夠咩？
Fortunately, I am only joking. Nobody would say that because no one can even conceive that 2 is enough. No, every single child is equally valuable, equally important, and that's how God looks at you this morning.
我頭先當然係講笑啦，因為每一個人會話真係咁樣睇嘅兒女，每一個都係咁重要。
And God seeks and searches for the lost.
神就係咁樣去尋找，就係要去揾一個失喪嘅人。
And then, when the lost is found, you can imagine there is celebration.
當我哋想諗下，如果你真係揾到嘅時間，可以就係有一個大嘅慶典出嚟。
I went back in the airport and I asked the attendant if he'd seen a lost passport.
當時喺機場裏邊，我就係咁樣走去問嗰個侍應話：你有冇見到一個護照咧？
And he said, "Oh, is your name Richard Cook?"
哦，佢就係話你，哇！你個名係咪叫做柯立天啊？哇！我個心真係完全鬆晒。
We went out into the neighbor's backyard, beat through all the trees, and we located our lost puppy and brought him home.
我哋就係走去我哋嘅鄰居嗰度，到處嗰啲樹啊，各樣地方都要揾，終於揾到時間，係
And
幾
thank
開心。
God our pastor found his third son in the Chuck E. Cheese's.
亦都感謝神，呢個牧師喺Chuck E. Cheese裏邊能夠揾到佢第三個仔。
And then you celebrate.
跟住我哋就要歡喜快樂。
And I think that a joyful, lively church
我哋亦都講話，當我哋如果真係有一個咁好嘅教會，咁開心嘅一個教
will
會，
be a church that is always celebrating.
係一個教會時時都有咁樣嘅慶
I
祝。
can't imagine any greater celebration than when someone comes to the front of the church for baptism.
我真係睇到無可比喻嘅，就係如果一個人能夠嚟到
And they
教會
testify.
話我要受浸，
They testify, I was dead and now I'm alive.
佢亦都係咁樣做見證話：我以前係死嘅，而家我
I was
復活
lost and now I'm found.
我以前係失喪，而家我已經
And
被
the
尋回。
church rejoices and celebrates.
整個教會就係咁樣一齊復興，一齊去開心慶祝。
You know what's even better than that?
你知唔知仲有咩更加好嘅咧？
The angels in heaven rejoice together with us.
就係天上邊嘅神嘅使者，神
God
嘅天使
himself
一齊喺度慶
rejoices.
神亦都係咁開心喺度歡呼。
In our experience, the church rejoices, but in the heavenly realms, there's an even greater rejoicing.
我哋就係睇到喺教會裏邊能夠真係咁開心嘅慶祝，我實喺天上邊更加大嘅一個嘅歡喜。
I pray that our church would be a church of rejoicing.
我真係為咗我哋呢個教會嘅禱告，就係話我哋要真係可以有呢個咁樣嘅慶祝。
I noticed your church has a middle name,
我知道你嘅教會係有一個中間有一個字
evangelical.
傳道。
I'm a church historian. I think the evangelical movement is one of the most beautiful, powerful movements of God in history.
呢個傳道就係真係喺教會嘅歷史裏邊係一個最緊要。
And one of the very powerful parts of evangelical Christianity is sharing the gospel.
而喺傳道呢度裏邊最緊要嘅就係講呢個分享我哋呢個嘅信息。
Taking the gospel to the ends of the earth, but also taking the gospel to our next door neighbor.
就係我哋要將福音傳到去地極，我哋要將福音傳到去我哋嘅鄰居。
I encourage the church to take the gospel to all peoples.
我真係希望教會就係能夠咁樣將福音可以傳到去。
But I also encourage you to do evangelism with your family, with your neighbors, with your colleagues, co-workers, classmates.
但我亦都真係希望你哋能夠可以喺我哋嘅朋友、我哋嘅家庭、我哋嘅同學之間能夠做傳福音嘅工作。
Maybe add a very simple practical suggestion.
可能就係加一個好簡單一個嘅提議。
I think we can work maybe as a teamwork, we can maybe be more effective.
或者我哋可以真係大家一齊嚟工作，可能會。
For instance, there's some in the church who are very comfortable teaching the Bible, very comfortable telling people the gospel.
或者教會裏邊有一個人真係能夠好 好熟悉，能夠知道點樣同人哋分享聖經。
Someone else might be very comfortable inviting people to their home. They love to host, they love to cook.
另外一個可能就係中意煮嘢，中意打開佢個門，歡迎人哋嚟。
But the person who loves to preach, they might not be comfortable hosting. Maybe their house, they don't feel it's clean enough or large enough or appropriate to host. So is it possible that the person who loves to host could host a dinner for non-Christians and we can work as a team? One family host, another family teach, and we all have the opportunity to preach the gospel.
我哋就係睇到喺呢個咁樣嘅一個做傳福音嘅工作，可能嘅人可能佢唔係咁中意打開道門歡迎人哋入嚟，亦都可能佢根本屋企都仲係好亂。但係另外一家可以真係打開門歡迎呢啲非基督徒入嚟，兩個加埋一齊就可以。
I think there are many ways we could think of using teamwork like that.
我哋可以好多方法都係大家可以嘅同工嘅工作。
But I particularly like that idea
我特別係中意嗰呢一個嘅
because there is power around the table.
因為喺呢個嘅台上邊就係有呢個嘅能力。
Table fellowship is a tremendous opportunity to do life transformation.
我哋就喺呢個座台上邊就可以大家有分享，可以將人哋改變。
I pray that this church would have many, many opportunities to celebrate baptisms.
我希望呢個教會真係能夠有好多好多嘅機會，能夠真係慶祝我呢個受浸嘅工作。
Let's pray together.
我哋一齊禱告。
Lord, I pray for my brothers and sisters here this morning.
神啊，我真係為咗我哋在座嘅弟兄姊妹特別嘅禱告。
I pray you give them the heart of the Father.
我希望你真係能夠俾喺神呢個嘅心能夠嚟到每一個人度。
A heart to love the lost.
俾我哋真係能夠有呢個心係去愛呢啲失喪嘅人。
And Lord, I pray this would be a church that often celebrates.
我真係嘅祈求，我哋呢個教會能夠時時都可以有咁嘅慶祝。
Celebrates that one that was lost has now been found.
我哋就係要慶祝話，呢一個嘅失喪嘅人可以而家真係尋回。
We pray in Jesus' name.
我哋奉主耶穌基督聖名祈求。
Amen.
阿門。
Amen. Thank you.
而家係聖餐嘅時候，如果你需要餅同埋杯嘅嚇，你係基督徒亦都受咗洗嘅，你需要餅同埋杯，可以輕輕舉手，我哋會遞聖餐嘅餅同埋杯俾你嚇。讓我哋都去有一個默禱嘅時候嚇，安靜我哋嘅心，亦都有一個省察自己嘅罪嘅心，去預備領受耶穌俾我哋嘅聖餐。希望弟兄姊妹都響你座位裏邊默禱嚇。愛我哋嘅天父，我哋嚟到你嘅面前，我哋一同再一次承認我哋嘅過犯，承認我哋嘅罪。主啊，你知道我哋嘅軟弱，你知道喺我哋日常生活當中好多時候我哋都係得罪你，我哋亦都得罪別人。但係我哋亦都嚟到你面前去感謝你，感謝你去尋找我哋呢一班失喪嘅人， 響罪裏邊，響我哋嘅自我裏邊，我哋失喪。但係你好恩待地差派呢個世上最大嘅宣教士，你嘅愛子耶穌基督嚟到呢個世上去揾我哋，亦都將佢獻上響十字架上邊，佢呢個完美嘅生命為我哋犧牲，以致我哋透過相信佢，竟然可以嚟到你嘅面前成為一個義人。所以我哋多謝你對我哋嘅愛。當我哋而家去領受呢個餅同埋杯嘅時候，求你繼續幫助我哋去紀念主耶穌基督響十架上邊為我哋做嘅一切。我哋今日祈禱，奉耶穌基督嘅名，阿門。根據我哋教會嘅傳統，耶穌俾我哋嘅聖餐係只係俾受咗洗嘅真心相信耶穌嘅基督徒。如果你未係受洗嘅，咁希望你唔好係同我哋領受呢個聖餐，但係亦都希望你呢真係快快決定能夠響眾人嘅面前，響神嘅面前受洗。但係你已經受咗洗嘅基督徒，我而家就請你同我一齊去領受呢個聖餐。當主耶穌被賣嗰一夜，佢拿起餅來，祝謝了，就擘開個餅說：這是我嘅身體，為你們捨嘅，你們應當如此行，為的是紀念我。讓我哋一齊領受耶穌俾我哋嘅餅。喺飯後，主耶穌也照樣拿起杯來說：這杯是用我嘅血立嘅新約，你們每逢喝嘅時候，要如此行，為的是紀念我。讓我哋一齊領受耶穌俾我哋嘅杯。讓我哋一齊再一次作一個感恩嘅祈禱。愛我哋嘅天父上帝，愛我哋嘅聖子耶穌，亦都愛我哋嘅聖靈，三位一體嘅真神。我哋何等嘅多謝你，何等嘅讚美你，響人類歷史當中，你施行你嘅救恩計劃，去尋找我哋失喪嘅人，讓我哋能夠響你裏邊可以復活起嚟，我哋嘅靈可以復活起嚟，有一個新嘅生命，亦都我哋盼望將來有一個復活嘅身體，正如耶穌死後3天復活一樣。父啊，你仍然願意喺呢個世上繼續施行你嘅拯救，所以就求神你俾我哋每一個基督徒有呢個勇氣同埋承擔你俾我哋嘅責任，我哋願意嘅去將呢一個咁美麗嘅好消息傳揚開去。響我哋近嘅，我哋傳揚開去；響遠嘅，我哋都願意傳揚開去。求主你繼續教導我哋，能夠把握俾我哋睇到你俾我哋響每一日生命裏邊嘅機會，去傳揚你嘅福音。我哋咁樣祈求，奉耶穌基督嘅名，阿門。
而家係歡迎同埋報告嘅時間。我哋好高興同埋歡迎大家今日一齊喺實體同埋網上做崇拜。今日我哋有新人。
各位弟兄姊妹午安。你好，好開心今日有新朋友嚟到我哋當中。李凌先生，佢係由 Kathy 帶嚟嘅嚇，歡迎你代表教會。Thank you，希望下個禮拜再見到你。
OK， 如果任何人有咩關於教會同埋屬靈上嘅問題，你可以打電話俾陳振鵬牧師。今日有4項報告。第一項呢，就係我哋建堂嘅最新嘅消息。聖地牙哥市政府已經將街道改善計劃嘅項目延期至下年2023年3月。由於佢哋嗰個電腦軟件技術有問題，佢哋咧嘗試，但係冇辦法更新建堂計劃嘅項目嘅限期。但係喺街道改善計劃獲得批准之前，佢哋都肯允許更改建堂計劃。總之，我哋獲得 必要嘅延期，並且應該能夠今年得到市政府對這兩項計劃嘅批准，所以我哋好感謝神。第二項就係湯卓事工，如果你願意喺主日6月12號第二堂聚會結束後，前往位於市中心嘅第一長老會服侍無家可歸者，幫助佢哋預備午餐。我哋需要15個志願同工參與。詳細嘅情形呢，將會喺1個禮拜前會發出俾嗰啲志願同工。如果願意參加呢，你請你通知林牧師報名，同埋佢哋需要全新嘅或者冇用過嘅男女襪啦、襪子同埋內褲，同埋其他新嘅或者輕輕用過嘅衣物。如果你係有得捐贈呢，係可以擺喺外邊正堂前廳嗰個箱裏邊。最後一天嘅收集就係6月12號。長青團契將於今個禮拜3 6月8號上午10點鐘透過 Zoom 舉行，希望長者能夠踴躍參加。仲有粵語部禱告會將會今個禮拜6月11號上午9點至10點透過 Zoom 參加，就歡迎同埋鼓勵大家我哋粵語部嘅弟兄姊妹參加。
再一次多謝柯博士今日嚟到我哋當中去證道神嘅話語，我哋多謝柯博士。可以嘅話請你起立領受神俾你嘅祝福。願耶和華賜福給你，保護你；願耶和華使他的臉光照你，賜恩給你；願耶和華向你仰念，賜你平安，從今時直到永永遠遠。阿門。請坐，默禱之後可以散會。